But so the next speaker I won't be holding that sign up for because it's Fran Spivy-Weber of the California State Water Resources Control Board. And she's currently serving as the vice chair of the board and liaison with several regional boards. Fran represents the Secretary of California Environmental Protection Agency on the Santa Monica Bay Restoration Commission. Fran previously worked as the executive director for the Mono Lake Committee, almost 10 years, served on numerous state and regional water advisory groups, including the Bay Delta Public Advisory Committee and its Water Use Efficiency Committee. She was co-chair of that. 2005 State Water Plan Advisory Committee, California Landscape Task Force back in 2005, State Water Recycling Task Force in 2003, and the Governor's Drought Advisory Panel in 2000. You knew this one was coming. You were back on that panel in 2000, right? She's also served on many boards that work on water and land resource issues, including the Water Education Foundation, California Council of Land Trusts, and the Clean Water Action Clean Water Fund. Fran has her MA in International Studies from Johns Hopkins University, and her interests include water sustainability issues in California, including the role of the state in supporting innovative solutions, and that is the subject of her talk today, Sustainability Initiatives in California. So help me welcome Fran Spivy-Weber.
And when I was asked if I wanted to have slides, I said no. I had said it for two reasons. One, I just got back last night from a 2-week vacation in Europe, in Rome and in Amsterdam, and I just didn't want to bother with slides. But secondly, actually, I think I loved the slides of the previous speaker because he's offering you so many ideas. I'm going to try to bring together in my presentation where we are in California on some of these things that he's talking about. Perhaps the most innovative and probably least heard about, least participated in terms of stakeholders, but most influential document that has come out of the Brown administration in the last 4 years is the California Water Action Plan. It is 20 pages, actually less, it's 19 pages, rare for a public government document, written by government agencies, multiple government agencies, as well as the governor's office, and was put together about this time last year as an attempt by the Brown administration to pull together the various aspects of water and to try to at least identify the key themes. And I think that's the key focus of the document. It's not so much that what it says in the text is so special, but it's that they have identified the key themes for water, and there are 10 of them. And I will run through those very quickly and then come back and focus on a few. One, and the first one, was to make conservation a California way of life. And in this document, they are they're focusing on water, no doubt about that, but they are integrating energy into the water picture. And so when you think of conservation, you can think not only of water, but you can think of energy, you can think of urban as well as agriculture. And so make conservation a California way of life. I have, in my years working in water, never, ever heard an administration embrace conservation in that way. It is unheard of. And many of you have said, not necessarily you, but many of your agencies have said to me, because I've worked on conservation for years, have said, oh, don't imagine that you can conserve your way out of a drought or water use or planning for the future. True, absolutely true. But making conservation a California way of life is not saying that this is the only thing that can be done, but it's saying what we will be needing to do and what we are going to do to deal with water in the future. The second item was increase regional self-reliance. And for that, many of you are engaged in integrated water management, and so you have some experience with that. You're also possibly engaged with some groups that are working on climate change and other kinds of integrative activities. Many of you may have experienced trying to work with some of your land use agencies who are looking to you to supply water for development that they have to build because the federal government has told them they do. And so figuring out how we increase regional self-reliance, you can just use the slides that were presented earlier. I think there are a lot of very, very good ideas there. The third was achieve the co-equal goals in the Delta for those of us who are experienced with importing water both from the Delta as well as from the Colorado River and from the Eastern Sierra. Creating a more efficient way of using that water and sharing that water with wildlife is a permanent challenge and is one that we have not done a very good job of, and we are suffering for it right now. The fourth was protect and restore important ecosystems. And there's a lot of text in this 19 pages about the different ecosystems that are out there that need to be restored. And my goodness, they didn't even scratch the surface. Certainly we know about salmon and we know about fish in the Delta, but there are problems with ecosystems in all parts of our state. Fifth was manage and prepare for dry periods. This was written in a context of climate change, and so it was acknowledged that there would be dry periods, sometimes extended dry periods. We've got one right now, and we have the experience of Australia that had one for 13 years. So we know that you have to be prepared for that. Sixth was expand water storage capacity and improve groundwater management. And at the time this was written, no one in their right mind would have said that the next year there would be groundwater legislation passed by adopted by the legislature and signed by the governor that had some real teeth and some real focus, but it happened. Next was provide safe water for all communities. And one of the actions that was in this section was the merger of the drinking water program with the clean water program that I had been involved with into one agency, and to try to start to get some efficiencies and improvements in the way these activities were carried out, and some of the synergies that we were hearing earlier that offer some options for the future. Then increase flood protection and stormwater capture and use. Increase operational and regulatory efficiency, basically a term encompassing mostly technology, making things more efficient through technology. And finally, identify sustainable and integrated financing options, because at the end of the day, there will be where we may be choosing the least cost approach, it still has a cost, and so getting the financing right has been very important. So those were the 10 items. They were in chapters. They weren't integrated, but they are operating, and I can say from the inside of state government, they're operating as a touchstone as we pursue activities we are looking at this document and we're saying, how many of these elements are we actually incorporating into the decisions that we're making, into the funding decisions that we're making, into the policy decisions that we're making, into the regulatory permitting decisions that we're making? Now, I can't say that we have leapt into the future and started doing an unbelievable job, but I think we are getting better at it. And so that was one of the outcomes of this document. The second outcome was a funding outcome, and that is the governor committed at the time that he would fund the activities in these areas, that he would pursue funding for activities in these areas. And I think you've seen that with his support for the bond, which passed in November. Certainly we saw it with emergency drought legislation for funding in February, and we've seen it for many of his budget decisions in July 1st. So it's 19 pages. For those of you who live in California, you should read it. And you should think about it in terms of how it is something that you can use as you move forward. Because if you're looking for the government as a partner, it will be in these categories for at least the next 4 years. It will be in these categories that the state government is going to be most interested in pursuing activities, but also in innovation. Innovation with universities, innovation with stakeholder groups, innovation in many different areas. So let me start back on focus on 3 or 4 different activities that are part of this action plan. One is, as I said, conservation as a California way of life. It sounds so easy, and for those of you who run water agencies, particularly water, when you're supplying water for drinking water purposes, you may be in need of looking at your pricing structure if you're going to actually make conservation a California way of life. Because if you are dependent on selling wet water in order to pay the people who work for you, you may not, if people are really good, and we've seen that they can be fairly good at conserving without much more than just exhortations, you may need to start looking at your pricing structures. How many of you who run water agencies, whether it be wastewater agencies or water supply, potable water agencies or stormwater agencies or any kind of agency, even your university systems, how many of you have done an audit on your on the various elements of your system to see which ones are truly efficient? I know you're going to be hearing later from Joe Grindstaff, and I'm going to give him a little bit of a push. His agency did this. The IEUA did an audit of their various systems, and they were very efficient. Among our water agencies that are out there in California, they are perhaps, with the exception of Irvine, I'm not sure. They are extremely efficient. But when they broke out their various activities and looked at each one, they found that in fact there were a lot of energy inefficiencies that could be changed. Now, why is that? Part of it is that the cost of energy, which was the main cost that was referred to in the earlier speakers, in the cost savings, a lot of that cost just gets passed on without having to explain it to the ratepayer. Gets passed on to the ratepayer through the water agency. It's an energy cost. It's not a water cost, and so they don't have to they don't have to explain it quite so significantly. And so these are two examples of, in terms of your own pricing structures and your efficiency, knowing where you can make changes that are going to be very, very important to making conservation a California way of life. Another area that is open for innovation is in changing lifestyles. Well, we're already getting changes in lifestyles, but with some of that change in lifestyles, we're getting smaller yards and more drought tolerant plantings in the yards, but that is going to have to become, I think, more deliberate and not so opportunistic as it is right now. In fact, in the future, it may be that you will want there to be more guidance as to what could or should be done in terms of the use of water. If we're maybe you want the standards, the housing standards that are out there, to better reflect this idea of conservation as a California way of life. The second area, increasing regional self-reliance, is something that many of the water agencies now are quite familiar with. You've all kind of met and started to know your stormwater friends. You certainly are working more closely with your wastewater friends, but we are still very siloed in our systems, and we're very siloed in our billing systems, in our technology sharing systems, not to mention in working with energy companies. And so getting more integrated into working with colleagues who are similar but not the same as you are is going to be important. And I'll tell just one quick story. I asked the current head of East Bay Mud, who at the time was not the head of East Bay Mud, I asked him about some water management, some very innovative water management that he was able to do on the McCollum River. And I asked him if there's just one thing you can possibly, that you could do that has made this successful, what is it that you would do again? And he said, have meetings. Now, that was the last thing I expected to hear from anyone in the water world who spends their entire lives in meetings. But what he meant was that these are meetings not of people inside the East Bay Mud system, but these were meetings with the farmers, with the recreationalists, with folks that were on the river. And I think that's true here in our urban areas and in our regional areas as we start to put together regional planning. We are going to need to have more meetings, but more intentional meetings that actually lead to outcomes that are important. And the final one that I will focus on is technology. I know you will, as we've heard, you will be hearing more about technology in the future. But I do think that this gap that was mentioned, and I'm going to steal that slide in the future, between the academic community and the water agencies is a real one. And so I think the more the request that you as an industry, that you begin to look at ways in which you can use the technology in a pilot way, but then with an eye toward actually putting it into practice. And I'll close with one story along those lines. There was a very innovative recycled water facility in North San Diego County, and they put together they got $1 million from the Energy Commission to do an efficiency study on the work that they on their production of recycled water. And they were successful. They went from using 5 engines to produce recycled water to using just 1, and so it was quite a big reduction. And the head of the agency was very proud, and he went back into his office. And several months later, he came out, and lo and behold, everything had been reassembled the way it used to be, not the new way. And he said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, and his staff said, "Well, we're worried that if the regulators come and look at our system under this new way, that it won't pass the test, and then we will get dinged on our performance reviews, and we won't make our increase in salary." And he said, no. We've got to go and put in the old system, or put in the new system. And what he ended up doing was changing the reward system for staff so that they got rewarded for keeping the energy efficiency in the system. And I think he just figured, I'll deal with the regulators somewhere else. And I think that is a very... particularly with the earlier question as to what do we do about regulators and decentralized systems, don't worry about it. We will figure it out together. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions, so if there are any, we have the microphones. Thank you for not making me hold up the stop card for you.
So yes, this is Bill Cooper from UC Irvine and the National Science Foundation. Thank you very much for your comments. And I think one of the things that was missing in the 10-point story there is, you've alluded to it, and that is communication. We do not communicate with the public how important water is and how cheap it is. They're perfectly willing to go out and spend $200 a month on their cell phone, and you get a rate increase of $1 a month, and they go crazy. We've got to do something about that risk communication, not risk communication, just communication in general. And I think that should be one of the things at the top instead of conservation. Not that I am against conservation, because I think we do a great job of conservation here in Southern California. The other thing, though, is this whole issue of regulation. I've been starting to preach in Washington to no avail. The fact that we have adopted a regulatory environment which is command and control. Command and control regulations really are totally opposite to innovation. And if we don't start to think about redoing our regulatory environment so it's more of a participatory environment, we're never going to see innovation to the extent that it needs to be involved, because the only way we're going to manage in the future is to really get serious about regulating in the right way. And I think that that's something that could be taken both in the state, for sure, and also nationally, and I think we would see a lot more innovation, because the community is so risk adverse for exactly the reason you pointed out with this guy in San Diego. They don't want to change because the regulators are going to ding them. So we need to figure out how to get around that. And I don't know if you've thought about that, but that's at least something to think about.
Two things. First of all, communication, I think, is important. And in the technology area, there's a lot of work going on in communication, giving individuals information about what they're doing, and often they will make changes. On the notion of the fact that if the regulators just got out of the way, innovation would happen and everybody would do better, I actually don't agree with that, particularly in the area of conservation. For years, basically nobody has cared about conservation. And starting in, certainly Irvine has, and you all have done a great job. Individual agencies have, and a few have done a good job, but most have not. And it's starting in February, the Water Board, it's not exactly a regulation, but it is required, started asking people to report how much water they were actually using. This, you can't imagine how much angst and concern this created in the entire state. But nobody knew. Nobody knew. And only a regulator was able to make that happen. And so I would say get creative about how you work with your regulators. Don't tell them to get out of the way because they're not going anywhere. But figure out how because they want to be as creative as you do. And so figure out how you can get with them, meet with them, and do some pilots, do some testing to do something creative, rather than trying to eliminate them, because I don't think that's going to happen.